All right, finishing up muscles. Really light. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this. Let's have a conversation. By the way, speaking of conversations, like I put up this discussion board thing that like hope you guys like ask questions and went back and forth. Nobody used it. And at this point, why try?
We see you every day. So
I know. All right. So hopefully you guys can see how obviously connected this is to what we just covered. We have spinal cord, motor pathways. So we're talking about muscle. There's different types of skeletal muscle. You guys are probably aware you have fast twitch muscle fibers and slow twitch muscle fibers. Fast twitch being those that have a rapid rate of shortening. They rely on very short energy supplies like your ATP, your creatine, things like that. And then you have your slow twitch muscle fibers who rely on The fast twitch are also called glycolytic fibers because they rely on glycolysis and anything that's faster energy source than that. Slow twitch muscle fibers are our oxidative fibers, which means they highly rely on oxygen. And if you were to look at two of these muscles next to each other, fast twitch would be a lot more red. It would be a lot have a lot more mitochondria. Slow twitch, not as much. They'd be a little bit lighter in color. Okay, like it says, most of our muscles contain roughly about 50% each. All right, some people are born with more slow twitch muscle fibers. Some people are born with more fast twitch muscle fibers, and there's very little you can do to change that. Okay, so if you are somebody who's born with slow twitch muscle fibers, what are you going to be good at doing?
running.
Running marathons. This is where it's good to know your audience. If you're born with a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers, what are you going to be doing? Sprinting, maybe weightlifting, things like that. Okay. Just some other characteristics, slow twitch muscle fibers, high myoglobin. Do you remember what myoglobin is? It's kind of like a muscle storage form of oxygen. So your hemoglobin will dump off oxygen, your muscle will use it, but some of that myoglobin will pick it up. So if you are doing you're in mile 25 of a 26-mile race marathon, it'll start shifting some of that oxygen to your muscle because your breathing isn't doing it anymore. High capillary density, which means you got a lot more blood flow going there. And we know that if we start exercising, what can we do to the capillary density in our muscles? Increase it. What's that process called? Pardon? Angiogenesis. Good. Lots of mitochondria, low glycolytic enzymes, because we don't want to rely on glycolysis. We want to rely on oxidation. Glycolytic fibers, fast twitch, usually large, low myoglobin because they're not relying as much on oxygen, amongst others. You can also think of the fast twitch as our power, like where the power comes from in our muscles. Okay, whereas slow twitch is more weaker but longer enduring. All right, so this kind of just shows you what they do. Here's your average man. Remember I said you have about roughly 50-50 fast twitch versus slow twitch. If you look at marathon runners, it's like 80-20. That's huge. And most people who are able to, your 2-hour marathoners, they're born with that. Like that's what part of what makes them as good as they are is they are born with this high level of oxidative fibers compared to the average person. So no matter how much you do, you're never gonna run that 2-hour marathon with that guy from Kenya. Okay, so if we look at like sprinters, for example, they have 64%, and this is average, right? 64% fast twitch, 37. That's like a 60-40. All right, so again, they're born with that. So no matter how much you train, you're not going to be able to switch your muscle fiber type over. At the end of this slide, it says different people have different proportions of these types, which is what that graph shows. There's very little evidence that training, which is what I've been saying, alters these fiber types. But what they are finding, new research is showing that we have in-between fiber types that could go either way. So if you have a high proportion of these in-between fiber types, you can switch towards slow twitch or switch towards fast twitch by training. And these fiber types will change, but your slow twitch or fast twitch fiber types won't. Okay, so these in-between are probably the intermediaries. And a lot of this research is done in animals. Unfortunately, we can't do the same kind of research in humans because it's unethical. I'm kidding. You shouldn't do. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we got to do the best with what we can. I've killed a lot of rats to prove that there are genes that make you a fast runner and genes that make you a slow runner. Chinese food, remember? Muscle fatigue. All right, what is muscle fatigue? Basically, if you are exercising for a prolonged period of time, relative to the type of exercise you're doing, like if you're a sprinter, a prolonged period of time is doing like 100 sprints. If you're a runner, a prolonged period of time is like 20 miles. All right? Basically, it results in a loss of ability to contract. We are not 100% sure, in agreement across research, what fatigue actually is. But what we do know is that in almost all cases, so this is the most widely agreed upon thing, it's accumulation of lactic acid that causes fatigue. You guys have felt the burn before, right? You feel the burn, lactic acid accumulates, you're like, oh God, I can't move anymore. All right? That prevents muscle fibers from responding. Lactic acid, right? Too much acid. You can't clear it fast enough. That's going to basically alter the molecular mechanisms in your muscle. We'll just put it that way. Decreased blood flow, for whatever reason, can cause fatigue. Ion imbalances. So when you exercise, you sweat. When you sweat, you lose water. You also lose salts, mostly sodium and chloride. Lead to muscle fatigue, and as well as psychological factors. And this is really interesting because you can take what they did a research study with bicyclists, elite bicyclists, and they said, all right, I want you to, and they were on a trainer, with a screen, and they watched themselves ride, and they said, all right, I want you to do this bicycling exercise, like go as all out, okay? And so they went as fast as they possibly could, did their maximum for that particular day, and they got averages, right? Because if you do it one day, you could just be having a bad day. Averages. Then they invited them back and said, all right, we're going to have you race against your last time, like your last one. So you guys ever seen those bicycles where they have the ghost of somebody who's going at a certain pace in front of you? So they said, we're going to have you race against yourself based on your last time. But what they did was they took the ghost and they increased the speed by like a certain percentage. And what they found was the bicyclists were still able to outmatch their ghost from the previous best time. So what that shows you is that it's not just physiological factors that are preventing you from performing, it's also psychological factors that could either prevent you from performing or help you perform better. All right, so psychology of exercise is a really fascinating field. All right, cramps are another one of those things, and by cramps we mean like that ow, Charlie horse kind of effect. Again, there's not a wide consensus on what causes cramps, but the most widely accepted theory is that it's decreased electrolyte concentrations. You know, you're sweating, losing water, losing salts, that cause overstimulation of the muscle, and that's what the cramp is. All right, so how do they fix that? Gatorade, salt pills, things like that. All right, this last part is why you should exercise, even in PA school. All right, physically fit people simply make less lactic acid. All right, why? They have better circulation, so they have more oxygenated blood coming in, more blood coming out. So you get more oxygen coming in, you're clearing out lactic acid much quicker as well. All right, so the more oxygen is producing less lactic acid, but whatever you're producing is getting cleared out much quicker. Increased oxygen carrying capacity because you're making more red blood cells. You have more myoglobin, and they've shown you have more mitochondria in your muscles. All right, and new capillary growth. Right, we know that. We talked about how that works. So if you stop working out, what happens? Mitochondria go away, capillaries go away, you don't clear lactic acid as much. So why should you exercise? So that when you are under a period of stress, whether you're exercising or not, you're better able to handle that stress. This is why sedentary people get more sick. All right, so now to the EMG portion of this topic. How to stimulate a muscle fiber? We do that through motor units. All right, and motor units is simply a nervous system connection to the muscle. All right, so if this group right here that contains the blue fibers and the red fibers is a single muscle, you have one motor neuron that's going to some of those and a different motor neuron that's going to others. Those are two separate motor units. All right, and they can contract independently of one another. All right, so a motor unit is simply an axon going to a number of muscle fibers. All right, so motor unit 1, motor unit 2 in that example. When we talk about motor units, we talk about them in terms of size. And we don't mean the size of the muscle. We mean the number of fibers per axon. So a small motor unit would have maybe 5 fibers per axon. Or 10. I'm sorry, 10. I said 5, it's 10. For example, it could have 5. All right? Those are usually used for precise control, very rapid reacting. Examples of that, extraocular muscles, our eyelids, our muscles that move our eyes back and forth. Those are small motor units. Large motor units, like our quadriceps, for example, you could have as many as 1,000 muscle fibers per axon. All right? And what's going to give you better control? Moving a big muscle or moving that smaller muscle? The smaller muscle, right? So these large motor units are more coarse control. You know, when I talk about, we use this example with kids. You have the gross motor and then the fine motor skills. Large motor units would be the gross motor skills. Small motor units would be the fine motor skills. So, fingers, what do you think? Small. Okay. All right. Within a given muscle, you have both small and large, and they overlap, and that's what allows you to coordinate your muscle. All right. You have both small and large. All right. So to talk about how they work, we have to talk about how we measure a muscle response. All right. So this would be a graph of a myogram where you have the force of contraction and time. So let's say you send a nerve signal right here, stimulate the muscle contract. You have this lag period between the time you stimulate and the time the muscle contracts. All right, because you have to send the acetylcholine across, you have to open up those calcium channels, you have to have myosin and actin interact with each other. That takes time. All right, we're talking less than milliseconds, but it takes time. All right, so you have this latent period. Then you have a period of contraction where myosin and actin are coming together. You get the maximum tension, and then relaxation coming back down. Myosin and actin are coming apart from each other again. All right, so that creates this tension graph. All right, and this is just showing you relaxed, contracted, relaxed again. All right, why do we talk about that? Because when we measure muscle responses, we're measuring the amount of tension that's developed as a result of an electrical stimulation. All right. A threshold stimulus would be the minimal amount of stimulation from the nervous system that would produce the most minuscule contraction, which we call a twitch. That used to be a video on there, and this person, like, their thumb was just twitching, just to show you what a twitch is. Now, can a twitch do work? In other words, if I were standing right here and my bicep twitch, would it do any work? No, it couldn't do any work. It's just a minor contraction. So, how do we go from a minor stimulation that just produces a twitch to a strong muscle contraction that actually does work? All right, that's what we're going to try to prove. All right, so this would be your twitch. This would be a twitch minimum response. And then we know that muscle responses can get stronger. This is be where we're actually doing work. All right, there's two ways in which we can do this. All right, we want to increase the tension. We want to increase the tension of the muscle. We know we have different number of motor units within a given muscle, and we know we're stimulating those motor units, right? So different number of motor units and the stimulation of that motor units. What do we know about an action potential? If we send an action potential down two neurons, are they going to arrive at the same time? Generally speaking? Yes. Action potentials all go the same speed, no matter what. All right, you can't. If you speed up an action potential, you're not going to get a stronger signal. So action potentials are like this all or none thing, right? So two ways in which we take that twitch and make it stronger. It says muscle fiber summation. I like to call it, another term for it is recruitment. All right. What this does is, if you want a stronger contraction, you're going to need to recruit more motor units. Right? If I have 100 muscle fibers within a muscle, I'm making shit up, and I stimulate 10 of them, that's going to give me a twitch maybe. If I stimulate 50 of them, that's going to give me a much stronger contraction, right? If I stimulate all 100, that's my strongest contraction. So we can recruit muscles. The second way we can do this is your whole nervous system works on, if I want to stimulate something to give a stronger contraction or to release more hormone from a gland, again, I can't make that action potential any stronger, but I can increase the frequency at which I send action potentials. So think of the nervous system as like an alarm system. And if you want something to happen, you've got to make sure you're sending that alarm multiple times, really rapidly. So if you increase the frequency of stimulation, even in, let's use that 100 fiber example, even if I take that 10 units and I stimulate it once, I get a twitch. But if I stimulate it 100 times within a second, I get a much stronger contraction out of it. Okay? So, to get a smooth muscle contraction that actually does work, you are recruiting more motor units and you're increasing the frequency at which you're stimulating them. Okay? All right. The way that this frequency thing works, here would be your stimulus. This would be the, actually no, that's calcium, which represents a stimulus. Here's your muscle contraction. That would be one. That would be that twitch. If I stimulate and you get the muscle contraction, but then I stimulate again before that muscle contraction relaxes fully, it's going to contract again on top of the first contraction. Then I stimulate again really quick, and you're going to get a stronger contraction because it didn't get a chance to relax. So that's how the force of that muscle gets stronger. If we stimulate so fast for a long period of time, we get what we called a tetanic contraction, tetanus. All right? I'm going to use your water bottle. Lifting this up and holding it here. I'm contracting my muscle right here. It's in a tetanic contraction right now because I'm constantly sending signals to that to keep it in a contracted state. That's, but can I hold it there all day? What's going to happen? Even though that's maybe 2 pounds, which is pretty light, I can only stimulate so much. I'm going to run out of ATP. I'm going to run out of calcium. I'm not going to be able to keep it up to that. So that's why tetanus is a normal thing that happens. But if we have it happening pathologically for a prolonged period of time, it's bad, right? That's why when you get that, you get your tetanus shot, and you don't want that bacteria getting in and causing tetanus. That's because that's happening non-physiologically all the time, okay? And you're going to get tired. All right. So, even as you're sitting there and you're not lifting up this heavy-ass water bottle, your muscles are still in a slightly contracted state. Your muscles are always in a slightly contracted state. In other words, your brain, your motor cortex is always sending a signal down to your muscles to get a sub-twitch contraction. Right? Remember, a twitch is the minimum amount where you get an actual contraction. But if you stimulate it, it's still going to... Here's myosin and actin. Normally, let's say every second you send a stimulation, it's going to go like this. It's not doing any work, but it's at least keeping them in a toned state. All right? Then if you actually lift something up, more stimuli, they interdigitate more. You get a stronger contraction. All right? So your muscles are always in a constant state of partial contraction. That's called tone. So when we talk about muscle tone, that's what we refer to. When we talk about vascular tone, the ability to keep our blood vessels partially contracted, that's what we're talking about. All right? Regular exercise increases muscle tone. So that's why you see these bodybuilders walking around with their muscles bulging out like this, because they're in a hypertoned state. Their muscles are receiving more stimulation than what a normal person would be. All right? If you don't have that state of partial contraction, in other words, if you lose your innervation to a muscle and you can't get it to contract, what's going to happen to that muscle? It's going to, first of all, it's going to become flaccid, which means it's going to, it's going to be squishy instead of, what's the other word I want to use? Solid. It's going to be squishy instead of solid. All right. Then over time, it's going to, who did you say it? Atrophy? It's going to atrophy and waste away. All right. When we talk about muscle contractions, and this is more getting into if you're going to get into sports medicine or things like that, this is going to come in more play there. General everyday, not so much. Two types of contractions with subtypes. You have isotonic contractions. What does iso mean? Same tone. So, same tone. I can lift this mug up. I'm changing the length of my muscle fiber. I'm lifting this up, but I'm having the same amount of tension on my muscle. Isotonic, same tone. Okay? If I'm contracting it, that's concentric. If I'm relaxing it, okay, I'm contracting, concentric. If I just relax it without an eccentric contraction, what happens? Right? So that's, yeah, there's a little bit in there. Did I get any on you?
I don't know. I didn't pay attention.
No.
No, you're good.
So I want a controlled relaxation. That's an eccentric contraction. So I don't want you to think that relaxation is just like a total, you're done. Isotonic, eccentric contractions, relaxing our muscle with the same tone is what we want to do. That's what enables us to put things down instead of dropping them. Okay? So like if you lift weights, if you've ever like done like curls, for example, you contract, you relax. It's actually the relaxation part that's more important, right? You don't just go and then lift it back up. That's bad. The other type of contraction is an isometric contraction. Iso means same, metric means length. All right, so same length. So I can change the tension on my muscle by pushing against this wall harder or not as hard. I'm not changing the length of my muscle, but I'm increasing the amount of tension that I'm putting on that muscle. Does that make sense? So an isometric contraction. I used, in undergrad, I'm not going to give you guys this question because I'm telling you what it is. I would put a test question. I said, if you walk into a restaurant and hold the door for your wife, what kind of contraction is that? Of course, it would be isometric because you're holding the door. Okay, and this is just showing you, I already showed you using my awesome acting techniques about what those are. All right. When we work out, this is the best way to explain this is if we work out, what happens to our muscles. All right. If we don't work out, but we still do stuff, this will still happen to our muscles. Okay. So, how do we get muscles to grow? We remodel what they are. So, remind ourselves that muscle is simply actin and myosin, right, in the muscle fibers. All right? How do we get that muscle that's just actin and myosin interdigitating between one another to get bigger? There's two types. One is hypertrophy. All right, so I want you guys to really know the difference between hypertrophy and hyperplasia. That's even actually more important than even the muscle remodeling. We used to call BPH, benign prostatic hypertrophy. We used to call it hypertrophy. Now we know it's not hypertrophy anymore. We know it's hyperplasia. So what's the difference? Hypertrophy is in muscle an increase in actin and myosin. All right? Your myofibrils will split from one another, and you'll get new proteins being formed. The muscle gets bigger as a result. Okay, so that's happening within a muscle cell. All right. Hyperplasia would mean you're forming new muscle fibers. So the cell's actually dividing. So the difference between hypertrophy and hyperplasia, hypertrophy, the muscle cells themselves are getting bigger. With muscle, it's because you're adding more actin and myosin. Hyperplasia would be your muscle cells are dividing and you're getting more muscle cells. All right? But what do we know about muscle cells? Do they divide? Mm-mm. Muscle cells don't divide. Neurons don't divide. Actually, we're finding this out to be not as true as we thought, but generally speaking, they don't divide. So they grow by getting bigger. Okay? And if they get bigger, if you have more muscle cells or more muscle fibers, that means you have more actin myosin, which means what? Your contractions are going to be stronger. Okay? That's the whole basis. And that's it. And we're done. So if you look at my